at the scent of water, it will bud and put forth shoots like a plant. Let's make Britain great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alex. Right, ladies and gentlemen, only one speech to go now before we take a short break, and it is the main event. Although nobody tell David Bull I said that, please. Now, earlier, Kirsty referred to my experience, and to those of you that know me, I have been fortunate enough over a number of years to work alongside a number of leaders. Too many, some might say, and therefore, with that in mind, I think I've got a fairly good handle on what makes a good leader. And actually, I made a list earlier during my speech of the things that I think are non-existent in Westminster. I talked about individual responsibility and integrity, respect for others, honesty, trust, tolerance, gratitude, humility, and courage. Now, I will always consider myself very fortunate to have worked alongside Nigel Farage for a number of years. And the reality is that for our brand of politics, the challenge has always been to find a leader capable of taking that fight forward. And it's not been easy. But I can tell you, as somebody who has the good fortune to work alongside our leader every day, he encapsulates, he personifies all of those things. There really would be no Reform UK without Richard Tice, for a whole host of reasons. Those of us that work with him every day never fail to feel energised, positive, enthused by his work ethic. You know, he's the leader that's out on the street, shaking hands, knocking on doors, talking to business owners, not being shielded by a security team of 20, but out there, often literally with his sleeves rolled up, and showing us all how it's done. We are incredibly fortunate to have him as our leader, and those of us that work in the party every day do so because of him. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and show your appreciation for the party leader, Richard Tice.
Today. How many of you have not been to a Reform event before? Put your hands up. Wonderful to see you all. Thank you for coming. Many of you have been here before. The word is spreading, and that is great, great news. We are growing rapidly. You've seen us grow in the polls. A year ago, people were laughing at us. Less than 3 or 4%. We're now polling the third largest political party in the United Kingdom. I just want to say not only a huge thank you to you for coming, but to thank Paul as Chief Executive and all the team that have organised this fantastic rally today. A massive thank you. Apparently I'm muted. Can you hear me? Yes. Who needs a speaker? So also council candidates. How many of you here are council candidates today? Thank you very much indeed. We've got almost 500 candidates. That's outstanding. A massive thank you. It takes something to put your head above the parapet, but that is just the beginning. Because by the time we get to the general election, we will stand everywhere in England, Scotland and Wales. Some 630 candidates. If you haven't put your name forward, we'll still find a slot for you. Now, let me just ask, we'll have a bit of audience participation. After 13 years of con-socialist Tory rule, Do you feel better off? Yes or no?
No.
1. After 13 years of Tory rule, do you feel safer on our streets?
No.
I hadn't even finished. After 13 years of Tory rule, after 13 years of Tory rule, is it easier to see a doctor?
No.
I was in Australia the other month, and I said that the government was delighted with their new target, that you could see a doctor within 14 days. The place fell about laughing. They said if we couldn't see a doctor in a day, there'd be riots on the street. After 14 days, you've either cured yourself or you're dead. So that's 3 no's. The 4th no, I'll talk about a bit more. After 13 years of Tory rule, is our immigration system under control? We're on song. This country has never been in such a shocking state after 13 years of con-socialist Tory rule. It is a catastrophe. The anecdote I like to use is imagine we're all in a boat on a calm lake. I know there's an analogy here. And the boat's being steered by some bloke called Sunak. And the bloke at the back with the engine is another bloke called Jeremy Hunt. And the problem is, at one end of the lake, there's a waterfall. And they are steering the boat ever closer to the waterfall. And the thing is, when water goes over a waterfall, or a boat goes over a waterfall, it ain't coming back. It crashes on the rocks below. It's finished. It's game over. Now, I don't know how close we are, but what I do know is that if this lot are allowed to continue to run our country in the way they have been, then we will go over that waterfall at some point in the not too distant future. And that would be an absolute catastrophe. Do you think it'll be better under commie Keir Starmer? No. The truth is, we've almost gone broke, sir, under the Tories. The truth is, they're both the same side, or different sides of the socialist coin. High taxes, high wasteful government spending, low growth, and the nanny state. As I said earlier, I think it's only Jacob Rees-Mogg's nanny that knows best. One thing is for sure, the nanny state does not know best. So we've got the lowest growth for a decade. Jeremy Hunt the other day was delighted with the new IMF forecast. Wow! The UK, we're going to grow next year at 1% if we're lucky. I mean, that's a big deal. That was not what Brexit was all about. So that's the bad news. The good news is there is still time to make Britain great again. The first thing we've got to do, and we know more than anybody, is we've got to do Brexit properly. And I'm so delighted that, as you've probably seen recently and heard, the gang is getting back together. Because I'm absolutely thrilled. The speakers earlier, Belinda, what an amazing speech. Alex, amazing speech. Former MEPs with me. But he's back. Brexit Ben, I call him. Brexit Ben, he's in the room. And if that doesn't whet your appetite, she's also back. The wonderful Anne Widdecombe is back. The truth is, I'm just the warm-up act. But to make Britain great again, we've got to make Britain work, and that means you've got to make work pay. But we're being taxed to the hilt. For too many people now, in all over every walk of life, people are saying, work doesn't pay. This is insanity. We've got the tragedy of 1 in 8 of the working age population on out-of-work benefits. 1 in 8. It's over 5 million people. And yet big business and all the politicians, they want to import more cheap, low-skilled labour from overseas. They're abandoning our own people, and it's not good enough. The highest taxes for 70 years, the highest government spending for 50 years, the lowest growth for 50 years. It's an absolute shocker. Absolute shocker. What we've got to do, our key economic policy, to make work pay, you lift the starting point at which you pay any income tax from £12,500 to £20,000. That's 30 quid a week in everybody's pocket. That frees up 6 million people from paying any income tax whatsoever. What does Jeremy Hunt want to do? No, he wants to do the opposite. He wants to freeze thresholds to drag in another 3 million of the least well off, the lowest paid, into paying income tax. They won't bother. It's a shocking way to try and create growth. So don't be surprised if you've got growth at 1%. Oh, but they might be happy about the size of the state. In the last 20 years, the size of state spending in this country has increased by a third. It's now some 45% of GDP. Now, the great Ronnie Reagan, the late great Ronnie Reagan, he said the government's view of the economy is, if it moves, tax it. If it's still moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. That is no way to run an economy, but that's exactly what this con-socialist government has done, and it's exactly what a Labour Party governing this country would do. And you look at the civil service, look at their performance in the lockdown, and we see the extraordinary decisions that were taken. And I'm incredibly grateful to my other half, who exposed the horrors that went on with the lockdown files. She's a very brave lady, and she took a huge amount of flack and abuse from the incompetent mainstream media who didn't do their jobs properly. Now, you look at the productivity of the civil service. I read the other day, sickness levels in the civil service last year, up 30%. Hang on, last year there was less COVID than the previous year. There you are, sir. This is no way to run an economy. Now, later on, the other great guru, my deputy leader who keeps me on the straight and narrow, Dr. David Bull, will be talking about the need to reform the way our health system works. Because we're the only party with that ambition of zero waiting lists. Now, many people in the UK and the media say, oh, don't be ridiculous, that's impossible. Hang on. Most other Western nations, with their own different types of healthcare systems, have effectively zero waiting lists and can see a doctor within a day or possibly 2. So why can't we? David is the man, he'll be talking about that later. Belinda and Alex spoke about our culture and the gender ideology. And I've got an update, because some of you may listen to David and I on Talk TV, and last Sunday was Easter Sunday. So I wanted to touch on things in my Sunday sermon, which is basically my rant of the week. Anyway, I did ask special permission, and my Sunday sermon was, what did you want to resurrect? And I said I wanted to resurrect traditional teaching in our schools, and we didn't want, millions of parents didn't want this gender ideology stuff to be taught to our children. And I asked what I thought was a pretty basic question. So we'll try it out. How many sexes are there? 2. Thank you. How many genders are there?
2.
Excellent. So someone handed me a list of 72 genders, and I just ripped it up. What a load of nonsense. But then I had the temerity to say that we didn't want this gender questioning taught to our children. And I described it as garbage and multiple gender claptrap, which is what I believe it is. I'm sure all of you use TikTok daily. But TikTok, within a couple of hours, took that video down. Oh yes, I was a naughty boy on Easter Sunday. Apparently, that incites hate. Apparently, that incites violence. Well, the latest update is my lawyer wrote to their lawyer and said that's defamatory. I'm not inciting violence. And they stand by it. I mean, this is unbelievable. This is an attack on free speech. It's an attack on free speech by a social media platform owned by people in the Chinese regime. Why do we put up with this? I was fascinated to see the other day that the state, I think, of Montana is looking to ban TikTok. And it's not just TikTok. No, Facebook. We put out an infographic, a picture the other day saying, I thought it was very harmless. It said we didn't want ISIS terrorists and criminals living in our hotels at our expense. Seems a perfectly reasonable thing to me. No, according to the guardian of free speech in this country, Facebook, that incites violence, is a breach of their community guidelines and has been taken down. This is what we face. This is the attack on our freedom. And this is why we have to battle so hard. It is absolutely essential. Which brings me on to another bugbear, I think, of many of us, certainly of me. Something called net zero. Now, look, we all want cleaner air, but net zero is the wrong bit at the wrong price in the wrong time frame. And it is making this country and all of us poorer and colder. Westminster's obsessed with it. Be under no illusion. Be under no illusion whatsoever. And I'll say it because it's true. We had a story the other day of someone over the age of 80 who was terrified of her heating bills. Cold, old people die early. So net zero is not only financially negligent to this country, I believe it is criminally negligent to this country. And that big consulting firm, KPMG, just the other day, they confirmed that the cost of net zero to every household for the next would be around £1,000 extra per household every year. That's the extra cost of net zero on all of you, everyone out and about, for this obsession with net zero, despite the fact we're lucky enough as a nation to sit on a pile of energy treasure. And the analogy I use is, lovely old auntie, the last thing she said to you is, I'm going to hand you down my house. There's a pile of treasure under the floorboards. I couldn't be bothered to dig it up, but it's worth about the value of the mortgage on the house. Just think about that. I'm pretty sure the first thing you'll do is go and find a nice clean screwdriver. Some of us might have to get the rust off it, that's all right. You're going to unscrew the floorboards unscrew the screws of the floorboards, take out the treasure, pay off the mortgage, and carefully put the screws back down again. That's the same analogy about using our own energy treasure. It is absolute negligence to be importing gas from halfway across the world, creating 3 or 4 times more CO2 than using our own, which would keep our jobs and our money here. And when I was talking about CO2, I mean, let's just remember, CO2 is actually quite useful. Because without CO2, there's no photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, there's no plant growth. And without plants and growth, we're all dead. It's unbelievable. So we have to take this battle on. We at Reform UK is the only political party that will challenge this madness, that will impoverish our nation. So let's scrap that net zero. But there is one net zero that I think the majority of this country would like. And that's to have net zero immigration. Because the reality is our population is at record high levels. It's almost 70 million. It's about 10 million more than some 15 years ago. Firstly, that didn't actually have the consent of the people. But secondly, the incompetent politicians and leaders, they didn't plan for the growth with infrastructure and investment in doctors, in hospitals, in affordable housing, everything that goes with it, which is one of the reasons why our public services are in such a terrible state. And actually the benefit of net zero immigration, what's interesting is about 400,000 people emigrate every year. So with net zero immigration, you welcome about 400,000 people in every year. The population stays the same. We can catch up. But the real benefit is that businesses will have to train and skill up our own people. Wages for the least well off will go up. And that will make work pay again, which brings me back earlier in the speech. If you make work pay, you'll get 2 million people of the 5 million out of work benefits rapidly back into work. Every million people on benefits is 15 billion quid, give or take. This is really important. It's our future. It's our young people. It is so important. So net zero immigration is the right policy for this country, without question. So we welcome the skills that we need whilst we're training up our own. But then in terms of illegal immigration, we should have zero. We've got only Reform UK has a clear, workable plan that will stop the boats. Now, the Prime Minister, at the beginning of the year, he rushed out his five pledges. And the one that he said he was really focused on and was going to achieve was to stop the boats. This week, he's bottled it. He's bottled it. And he's admitted, actually, it's quite difficult. And then he may not be able to stop the boats, but he may get the number down. That's not good enough, Prime Minister. We have a clear 6-point plan. See if I can remember them. The first thing you've got to do, and I know it works because it's what they did in Australia. So you've got to declare a national security threat, which we're allowed to do under UN 51 Convention, Article 9. I've read the thing. The second thing you've got to do is we've got to leave the European Court on Human Rights. We invented human rights. We don't need some foreign court telling us about our own human rights. Thank you very much. The third thing you've got to do is we've got to make it absolutely clear that zero people who come here illegally will be allowed to settle. The fourth thing we do is we set up offshore processing centres. The fifth thing we do is we say, look, the Home Office is broken. It's not fit for purpose. We've got to set up a whole new department of immigration staffed by people who believe in the cause of secure borders. That simple concept of knowing who's coming in and who's going out. That's the fifth thing. And then the sixth thing, which we can do under existing international treaties, I've read them, is we can pick people up out of the boats and safely put them on our border force cutters and take them back to France. In a heartbeat, you cut off the business model. And that has to be the right thing to do. So we can stop the boats, but only Reform UK believes in it. Do you think Labour will stop the boats? No. They don't believe in it. They believe in open borders. The Tories believe in open borders. That's not what Brexit was about. Brexit was about taking back control of our laws, our money, and our borders. And they've failed on every count. And you'll hear more from Brexit Ben a wee bit later. But here's another thing. I'll go back to Ronnie Reagan. He quite rightly said that freedom is always within a generation of extinction. It doesn't pass down to our children in the bloodstream. It has to be fought for, it has to be protected, and we have to hand it down to our children so that they can hand it on. We have to battle for it. And all of the things you've been hearing this morning, and we'll hear this afternoon, these are the battles that we face. But I'm absolutely confident that there is seismic change going on in this great country of ours. Because so many people feel politically homeless. Now, yes, it takes time to spread the word about reform. Of course, building any brand takes time, whether in business or whatever, least of all in politics. But as I said earlier, we're making real progress. We're polling the third largest party. The Tories are absolutely petrified. And quite rightly, they should be. So we need you, please. You're the reformers with us, the great team that we've got. We've got to spread the word. We've got to let people know. We've got to stand as candidates, tell our family, our friends, our people at work, even people we don't know, just stop them and have a chat. And it's up to all of us. I can't do it alone, nor can David, and all of the team. Everybody, spread the word, because it is time to change politics for good. Yeah, yeah. This great country of ours, it deserves so much better. But what is absolutely clear to me is that the United Kingdom needs reform, and reform needs you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Noticed that we are running a tad over time, as tends to happen at these things. So we're having a slight shift around. We're going to have a rocket speed 15